Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I want to start off this class lecture with some words of wisdom from Ted Kooser and talk to you a little bit about poetry, introducing this poetry segment, and getting us started thinking more deeply about what poetry is and how we are going to be discussing it over the next several weeks. In one of the chapters, that in Ted Kooser's book, from chapter 1, he talks about the poet's job description. One of the lines that I want to address right now really stand out to me. And this is where he's talking about making a career as a poet, and addresses a little bit about the need for poets to embrace poetry as something other than a lucrative money-making career. And one of the things that he mentions at the end of a paragraph on the first page, he says, "In poetry, the only rules worth thinking about are the standards of perfection you set for yourself." I think this is a really important line, not only in poetry, but also in writing overall, because we as writers are only responsible for setting the rules of perfection for ourselves and how we want to define our writing. And how that translates with poetry is thinking more deeply about what we want to get out of the poems that we create this semester. Thinking more deeply about the meaning behind them. An idea that I'll be talking about over the next several weeks is the emotional center. Thinking about the emotional center of a poem, what its intention is. There are some technical aspects about it. We'll talk a little bit about the speaker of the poem and some of the different types of poems, structure, stanzas, line breaks, things like that. But overall, regardless of the style that you're writing in and the subject matter, who the speaker is, the most important thing to ask yourself is, what is the emotional center? And during my commenting and during our conferencing, as we talk about revision of your poem, and as you revise them, we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about that emotional center of the poem. And so this leads me to another point that he makes a little further on in his book. In a later chapter, he is discussing, in chapter 2, actually, writing for others, he's discussing the idea of poets writing for themselves. And what he says here is, a poem is meant to be shared with others. Like all works of art, regardless of what it is, if it's writing, painting, sculpture, music, whatever it is, art is meant to be shared with others. It's meant to be an experience that you're giving to a viewer or a listener. And this semester, I want you to be thinking about your poetry in that way. What ideas are you trying to communicate? And that's the biggest point that he makes in his opening chapters here, is that poetry is communication. Poetry is thinking more deeply about what ideas you're communicating, what emotions you're communicating to your reader, and finding that image that will help to convey that idea, that feeling, that emotion, that visceral experience that the reader has whenever you are presenting them with poems. So what I want you to do right now is I'm going to give you a prompt for your writer's notebook. And so when I give you the prompt, I want you to pause the video and take about 10 or 15 minutes to work on your prompt. Let's say no more than 15 minutes, but it can be anywhere between 10 and 15 to work on this prompt in your writer's notebook. And then when you're done, start up the video again and continue on with the lecture. All right, so for this prompt, I'm going to give you a list of words. This is a list of words prompt. I have 6 words for you, and what I'm going to ask you to do is write a 6-line poem, each line using one of the words from the list. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the order that I'm presenting them to you. You can mix them up and use them in any way you want. I want you to use each word only once. And it doesn't need to be the first word, it doesn't need to be the last word, but each word I want you to try to work out a poem in 6 lines, and the 6 words that I give you appear in each of the lines, 1 word per line. Okay, are you ready? The words are window, asphalt, respectable, grandiose, riptide, puncture. And they're appearing up here on the screen, and you can just pause the video and work on that poem for about 10 to 15 minutes in your writer's notebook, and then when you're done that, return to the lecture. Okay, I hope that went well. I imagine it was a little tougher than you thought, or maybe you thought it'd be really, really tough, and it was just as tough as you thought. So I hope you had fun with it. It's a way. This prompt is a way to get you to think about how seemingly disconnected words, or words that really have no relation to each other at all, how you can find a way to connect those words together, and creating some sort of meaning out of that. So I'm looking forward, when we come back to class next week, I'm looking forward to hearing some of those if you're willing to share. Okay, I want to move on here to a quick anecdote, a little reading from The Writing Life, Annie Dillard's The Writing Life. She discusses a segment about letting go of writing and serving the finished product. And the idea behind this segment of her text is about the connection that we writers have with the pieces that we create, and what kind of language can we create for ourselves, even emotional language of letting go of the things that we create, knowing when something is finished and knowing when something is unfinished and just can't go any further. Being able to let go of that and move on, and not be held back, not allow your writing process to be held back by pieces that need to be sort of laid to rest. And so the story that she tells goes, every year this young aspiring photographer brings a stack of his prints his best prints to an old honored photographer seeking his judgment. And every year the old man studies the prints and painstakingly orders them into two piles, those that are bad and those that are good. And every year the old man moves a certain landscape print into the bad stack. And at length he turned to the young man and says to him, "You submit this same landscape photograph to me every year, and every year I set it aside in the bad stack. Why do you like it so much?" And the young photographer turns to him and says, "Because I had to climb a mountain to get it." Now this anecdote, this story that Dillard tells, is very revealing about how holding on to every piece that we create can oftentimes get in the way of that creativity. And so with this idea, I want you to be thinking about this photographer, the young photographer who has this piece, who had to toil, work really hard to get this one particular shot. He had to climb a mountain to get it. And it turned out that in the end, the photograph really wasn't very good, according to his mentor, this old honored photographer. So I want you to just keep that anecdote in mind, keep that idea in mind, and we'll revisit this idea, this thought, as we move forward in the semester. But I want you to stop and kind of think right now, like, do you have a piece of writing that you feel like you've been working on for a long time, or something that you feel might be ready to be laid to rest, whether it's good or bad or otherwise? It's really not for us to judge whether our stuff is good or bad. That's for other people to judge. But do you feel that you are being held back by a particular piece that you feel needs to be set aside, needs to be laid to rest? A question that I want you to consider. All right, I've created small groups, and I'm going to ask you to, at this point, again, pause the video and get into Canvas and go to the discussion board where you will find your small group. I've set you up with a few other people from class, and there is a prompt number 1 that I'm going to ask you to respond to with your group. And for the next 20 minutes or so, this isn't the way these discussions are set up. They're not like a live sort of on the fly. You're not going to be seeing each other. This is just a discussion board where you're going to be posting. So for the next 20 minutes, I want you to work on your post, get it posted, respond to whoever else gets theirs posted and up on the discussion board. Spend the next 20 minutes or so writing, posting, and then responding to at least 1 or 2 of your peers' posts as well on this prompt number 1. So I'll ask you to pause the video here and then get into the discussion board for today's class, and for the next 20 minutes or so, work on prompt number 1. You can pause now. Hi, welcome back. So now that you've finished up with prompt number 1, I want to move on to the second segment and the last part of what we're going to be doing here. I'm going to read you a short poem. This is in your Poetry 180. Some of you may have chosen this poem to read and write about in the first segment of the writer's notebook responses or you maybe at least read it. I've provided you through Canvas with a copy of this in case you don't have your book handy, or with you. This is Billy Collins' Introduction to Poetry. This is the first poem in the book. I'm going to read it once, and then I'm going to have you get back into your groups. There's a list of instructions in the prompt number 2, and I'm going to have you wrap up class by responding to the prompts in the discussion board, and then wrapping up your discussion with your peers in the groups, and that'll wrap up class for today. So I'm gonna read the poem once, and then I'll have you pause and work on this prompt number 2. When you're done with that, there's probably going to be about a minute or 2 of my sort of wrap up for the day. So just come back to the end of the video when you're done with this prompt number 2. All right, this is Billy Collins' Introduction to Poetry. I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside a poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. Okay, so at this point, go ahead and pause the video and work on prompt number 2. This should take you about 20 to 30 minutes of your time to make sure that you're getting your responses done and posted, and then working through the active discussion with your peers. As you do this, you may have to, once you get yours posted, you may just have to wait and refresh your screen until you see other people starting to post their work as well. And then as soon as the time is up on that, come back and I'll have a few final words for you. Okay. Thanks for engaging in that final prompt number 2 discussion. I want to just wrap up here with some ideas about what I want you to think about with the poems that you're creating. I had you turn in some drafts of a couple of your own poems for this week, thinking about this idea going forward, these ideas I'm going to talk about right now going forward with your own poems and with the revisions that you're going to do, and with the poems that you're going to continue to read and write about in your writer's notebook. Like I said at the beginning of the video, poetry is about giving the reader visceral experiences. Poems are not about abstract ideas or thoughts. Postmodern poetry, like we're reading and writing today, is about those visceral experiences, visceral meaning that they're felt in the body. They're not intellectual. They are not sort of these crude or elemental emotions. We want to have those visceral experiences. Think about the senses. What are we seeing? What are we tasting, feeling, smelling, touching? All those experiences are a part of what makes up a poem, and we get some great examples of that in Billy Collins' Introduction to Poetry poem that you just talked about. Some really great imagery that you explored in this poem. So think about that. Think about the ideas of metaphor and imagery. These are really the two most important concepts in poetry that will help transform that abstract into the more concrete, visceral experiences, metaphor and imagery. So thank you all for participating in class today, and looking forward to reading over the responses that your groups had today in the discussion. And I will see you in the next class. Have a great day.